What you are looking at here are two pictures. The one on the right is an image of Mars taken from the surface of Earth. And the one on the left is an image of Earth taken from the surface of Mars. Good evening, welcome, and thank you all so much for coming out to my MacLaren Society presentation titled Journeys to New Worlds, an Imagination of Humanity's Future in Space. My name is Nathaniel Halavin, and as Mrs. Hall said, I teach physics and computer science at Thomas MacLaren School. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Physics from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. in 2014, spending much of my time there working as an undergraduate researcher for a nuclear physics professor. However, despite my enjoyment and interest in high-energy nuclear physics, in many ways my passion has always been for space science. Before I really dive into the substance of the talk, I wanted to take a brief moment to comment about the tone or perspective with which I shall be approaching the topic of space science. I am quite intentionally going to consider the future in a distinctly optimistic fashion. I find it is vastly more productive and interesting for me, number one, to believe that the future will be better than the past, and number two, to work to make it that way. Now you might ask, well, better in what way? And that is a very valid question to ask, and one that I certainly hope to address in one way or another during the course of this talk. But regardless of how you define better, I still believe better is possible, dare I say probable. And this talk will treat the topic of space science in a correspondingly forward-looking and positive way. The structure of the talk will take the following form. First, I'd like to give a brief overview of where we've been. That is, what sorts of accomplishments humanity has already achieved in space. It is, of course, impossible to do true justice to the vast array of triumphs and the vast number of people who have worked in space science, so think of this as a greatest hits album. I'll provide some of my favorite highlights, and that will in turn provide us context for the talk moving forward into the where we're going section. In this section, I'll discuss some of the more notable plans that have been made for spacefaring missions, both by governments and private corporations. However, I offer a similar caveat here. As the space industry undergoes accelerating expansion, it becomes harder every year to compile anything looking even close to a comprehensive list of planned missions to space. Next, we move into the where we might end up section. This section moves from the concrete and planned missions of the previous segments into more speculative ideas. Now, I prefer my speculation, my fiction, if you will, to be deeply rooted in real science, and this will be no exception. I will discuss this topic in large part with help from a remarkable short film titled Wanderers by the Swedish filmmaker Erik Wernquist. The 3.5-minute film will provide some excellent stills and set pieces to help us imagine the more distant future of humanity in space. And finally, perhaps the most intriguing question of all, the why of it. It is here that I remind you of the title of the talk, that indeed this is just one imagination of humanity's future in space, and the why of it, therefore, will also be subjective. However, I do hope to bring interesting points to the table in this section and cause everyone to maybe think a little harder about the topic or pose interesting questions of their own in discussions they might have. At the conclusion of the talk, we'll allow a little time for Q&A. Where we've been. What list of spacefaring highlights would be complete without our trip to the closest neighbor? The first time a human stood upon, as the title of this talk says, a new world, our moon. Stark, barren, but undeniably beautiful. The moon landings have been rightly immortalized in museums, American currency, movies, and many other places in our present culture. And yet, it's still worth taking a moment to marvel at this incredible achievement. For instance, ponder for a moment the sheer mathematical scale of this particular journey to a new world. This image in the upper left represents the Earth, and over there on the right, rendered to scale in both distance and size, is our moon. Look how many Earths can fit between. Now, I come from out east, so to me everything feels geographically much larger out here, because it takes hours to drive anywhere because of the sheer distance. But now picture the entire Earth 30 times between us and the moon. And to think that human beings, separated from the void of space only by a few centimeters of metal, made that trip, stood upon that new world, and lived to tell the tale. The picture on the left here is of US astronaut Gene Cernan, who was in fact the last man to stand on the lunar surface. And you might be tempted to think that we have left the moon alone since then. But lunar science has progressed even while manned missions or the establishment of any sort of permanent base was placed on the back burner. The animation on the right here, for instance, was captured by a Japanese lunar orbiter just several years ago. The Earthrise, as it has been referred to, was first viewed by the astronauts nearly 50 years ago and is captured in all its glory here for us to see. Cute, isn't it? It seems even a Mars rover isn't immune to the desire to take a selfie. You might recognize this fellow. This is Curiosity, a remarkable machine about the size of an SUV that carries an entire suite of advanced scientific instruments. It landed on the Martian surface in August of 2012, and it has accomplished much in its time there, finding, among other things, all the molecules necessary for life, detecting evidence of liquid water, and measuring significant geological diversity. A fascinating little highlight here: when I was in college, I had the privilege of hearing a talk by one of the Curiosity operators, and her job was so unique because she in fact operated Curiosity in the night shift. Curiosity is never alone, despite the fact that it's on the Martian surface there seemingly by itself. It is actually in consistent 24-hour operation, and this perspective on what it was like to work the graveyard shift of an object that's 34 million miles away was pretty unique. Yet Curiosity wasn't the first robot on Mars. All the way back in 1997, the US landed the Sojourner rover on Mars, returning the first data from the surface. In 2004, NASA landed a pair of rovers on Mars, Spirit and Opportunity. These incredible machines have far exceeded their initial mission parameters, covering nearly 30 miles between the two of them. Like the moon missions, it can be easy to forget the sheer scales involved here. What you are looking at in this picture is the surface of another planet that is, again, 34 million miles away, on average. A scale picture of that, in the same scale as the last one, wouldn't even fit in this room. It is a 20-minute round trip to even send and receive a signal at the speed of light to this probe. And yet Mars hasn't gotten all the attention. Scores of probes, more numerous than could be described here, have crisscrossed the solar system in search of further knowledge. They have visited every planet orbiting our sun and many other celestial bodies as well. The pictures they have sent are nothing short of captivating. Now, I've switched it up a little bit here for fun with the pictures of Venus and Mercury. Whereas you often see Venus as this orange false color image and Mercury as the silvery gray true color image, I've done the opposite. On the far left and the bottom, we actually see a true color image of Venus, what it would actually look like, giving us a fascinating look at the weather patterns on this highly pressurized superheated planet. And in the middle on the bottom, we have a false color image of Mercury, where light from spectra outside of our visible range is mapped onto a spectrum of visible light, allowing the infrared and ultraviolet complexities of this planet to be fully visible to the naked eye. And on the far right on the bottom, we have Pluto. New Horizons, a probe that took a decade to reach its target, sent us back the first detailed images of this faraway place. A planet so far from the sun, it takes light traveling at 186,000 miles per second, 5.5 hours to reach it. Above on the left, we have the famous pale blue dot, when the Voyager spacecraft turned its camera to glimpse Earth one last time before it zoomed out of our solar system at over 10 miles per second. The fastest spacecraft ever, it is also now the furthest, becoming the first spacecraft in interstellar space in September 2013, 36 years after its launch. Included on this spacecraft was the famous Golden Record, a carefully crafted audio and visual record that contained as much information about human beings as the makers could possibly squeeze onto it. Spoken word, music, images, and the Golden Record is a fascinating confluence of scientific and artistic pursuits. All of the recordings are online. I encourage you to look and see what it was that people back then in the 70s deemed represented our species. Of particular note was the recording sent by then President Jimmy Carter, which said the following: "This Voyager spacecraft was constructed by the United States of America. We are a community of 240 million human beings among the more than 4 billion who inhabit planet Earth." Clearly there are more of us now. "We human beings are still divided into nation states, but these states are rapidly becoming a single global civilization. We cast this message into the cosmos. It is likely to survive 1 billion years into our future, when our civilization is profoundly altered and the surface of the Earth may be vastly changed. Of the 200 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, some, perhaps many, may have inhabited planets and spacefaring civilizations. If one such civilization intercepts Voyager and can understand these recorded contents, here is our message. This is a present from a small, distant world, a token of our sounds, our science, our images, our music, our thoughts, and our feelings. We are attempting to survive our time so we may live into yours. We hope someday, having solved the problems we face, to join a community of galactic civilizations. This record represents our hope and our determination, our goodwill in a vast and awesome universe. Quite utopian in its tone, but you heard what I said about optimism earlier. Regardless, hearing the words galactic civilizations come out of the mouth of a major head of state is certainly peculiar. This slide shows some of the work of the Cassini program. Focusing on Saturn, this program has provided us a wealth of information about the famous ringed planet and its many moons. The larger image on the left shows the sheer size of this planet as it positively dwarfs one of its moons, Enceladus, in the foreground. On the upper right, this collection of photos shows the remarkable complexity in the whirling, stormy clouds of gas that make up the planet Saturn. This particular storm system, many, many times the size of Earth and located at Saturn's North Pole, actually takes on a distinctly hexagonal shape. After gathering immense amounts of data over many years, the Cassini probe gave a fantastic grand finale in September of 2017 when it ended its mission by hurtling on a collision course into the planet Saturn itself. Aside from capturing some otherwise inaccessible data about the planet from that close, the destruction of the Cassini probe prevented it, being a man-made object, from contaminating any of the moons of Saturn and thereby skewing data from future missions. So blowing it up was actually doing the future a favor, I suppose. This image of Jupiter's red spot is not a painting. Despite the swirling patterns that evoke some piece of modern art, this is an actual photograph detailing the tremendous intricacy of the gases that make up this gas giant. Keep in mind here that the Great Red Spot itself is larger by far than the diameter of the Earth. A particular favorite of mine, the Rosetta mission remains an incredible feat of human engineering. The students will remember that I gave an assembly about this very topic. Launched in 2004, the probe's target was the very surface of a comet. Its mission, which is still being undertaken in the form of data analysis, was to find out if the water on the surface of primordial Earth could have been delivered by impacting comets such as this one. The precision of the orbital dynamics boggles the mind. The path of the probe is summarized in the upper left animation and takes place over the course of 10 years of unpropelled flight, showing how, in some ways, it's almost like the greatest trick shot of all time. Gravitationally slingshotting off planet after planet, it was able to reach the requisite velocity of 9.5 miles per second. After 10 long years of travel, it rendezvoused with the comet, achieving a relative velocity match to that comet within 2 miles an hour. That's within 0.06% accuracy. Insane. The animation in the upper right shows the orbital approach necessary to achieve this. Again, the precision in both calculation and instrumentation is staggering. The orbiter then proceeded to land a probe on the surface of the comet, capturing the images seen below. Images, once again, taken from the surface of a shooting star. Rosetta was named after the famous Rosetta Stone, and the probe itself, in fact, carried with it a micro-etched pure nickel prototype disc inscribed with 6,500 pages of Earth's languages. A little light reading for any other intelligence out there. Perhaps no mission, however, has profoundly affected the public consciousness as much as the Hubble Space Telescope. Like opening our eyes to the universe around us, Hubble has served up image after image of stars, nebulae, galaxies, and indeed entire superclusters. More than just making for excellent wall calendar material, Hubble's data has spurred a renaissance in astronomical study, both by providing enormous amounts of new data to analyze and by inspiring scores of new astrophysicists to enter the field and analyze it. Yet Hubble, along with so many other Earth orbiting missions such as satellite communication or the Global Positioning System GPS, could not have been possible without establishing a permanent presence in the orbit of Earth. The International Space Station and the shuttle program that in many ways enabled it have kept the dream of space exploration alive in a time when it began to wane. The science completed on this orbital platform has paved the way for what comes next. For the first time, humans lived and worked in microgravity for extended periods of time. However, this seemingly distant station, whipping around the Earth, the entire Earth, once every 90 minutes, is actually much closer than you might realize. When it passes over Colorado, it is quite visible, even with the most basic of telescopes, being about as close to us as the Wyoming border. Though the last shuttle has flown and been retired, new forms of space travel await us, which I now begin to discuss in our next section. Where we're going. We find ourselves today in the midst of a reawakening of space science. Many corporations and countries have begun to set their sights on space travel. Some notable examples are the plans of countries such as Japan and South Korea. South Korea, as pictured in the bottom right, plans to send a probe to the moon in 2020, allowing it to join the ever-expanding list of spacefaring nations. Japan's plans are in many ways loftier. In addition to being among the rather lengthy list of nations planning to colonize and mine the moon in the near future, of which of course our nation is one, Japanese scientists have also theorized a plan to build a vast array of solar panels ringing the moon. They would be constructed by a veritable army of autonomous builder drones. This sounds crazy until you realize that it is already possible for a car to drive from California to New York without a driver. So how much of a stretch is it really to suppose that autonomous machines could build this array? The energy collected by this solar array would then be beamed back to Earth in the form of microwave rays of light. It's a fascinating plan to address the growing energy needs of our world. Somewhat closer to home, companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, owned by Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos respectively, have made great strides toward making travel to space more cost-efficient and accessible. Both have disclosed plans to bring tourists, and in the case of Blue Origin satellites as well, to space for a fraction of what it used to cost to achieve low Earth orbit. Virgin Galactic plans to achieve this by launching their spacecraft from already airborne vehicles, sort of like a spaceship launching off of a plane. Blue Origin, on the other hand, achieves the cost reduction by utilizing test flight proven reusable rockets, much like their rival SpaceX, that I will talk about next. SpaceX. As any company have captured the imagination of the world quite like they have. Formed in 2002, the first 3 launches of their Falcon 1 spacecraft ended in catastrophic critical mission failure. That's, they blew up. At the end of their funding rope, their 4th launch had to work. And it did. And since that key moment, SpaceX, led by its charismatic CEO Elon Musk, has expanded their list of accomplishments and their list of quote-unquote aspirational goals prodigiously. Here is a short list of the accomplishments they've already achieved. The first privately funded liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit, 2008. First privately funded company to successfully launch, orbit, and recover a spacecraft, 2010. The first private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, 2012. The first company to send a satellite into geosynchronous orbit, 2013. The first landing of an orbital rocket's first stage on land, 2015. The first ever landing of an orbital rocket's first stage on an ocean platform, 2016. The first relaunch and landing of an already used orbital rocket, 2017. The first reflight of a commercial cargo spacecraft, also 2017. And finally, just very recently, as I'm sure you might have seen, the first privately funded payload to escape Earth's gravity. SpaceX has in large part funded these milestones by running contracted missions to the International Space Station with their Dragon spacecraft pictured lower left. The video on the upper right shows the landing of the Falcon 9 spacecraft. The impact of this milestone cannot be overstated. They dropped an object the size of a 10-story building out of space at speeds faster than the fastest aircraft and landed it safely and exactly at X marks the spot. Space lift, or the launching of objects from Earth's surface to space, was once prohibitively expensive due to the one-time use nature of rockets. Imagine throwing out the commercial jet after each flight. Imagine how expensive each ticket would be. But space lift has now suddenly been brought within reach with the advent of reusable rockets. Since their historic first landing of Falcon 9 in 2015, SpaceX has reflown and landed the exact same spacecraft once again. It is no longer theory. SpaceX's wild promises have time and again been met and exceeded. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who currently holds the record for the longest mission in space, made the following remarks on CNBC. He said, "When Elon Musk said he was going to launch his rocket and then land the first stage on a barge, I thought he was crazy. And then he did it. I'm not ever going to doubt what he says ever again." SpaceX also has going for it, and I mean, clearly, some incredible PR. The company, in many ways, due to the sheer force of personality of Elon Musk, outwardly approaches space science with a sort of childlike delight and unfiltered enjoyment. For instance, the autonomous robotic barge that serves as the location where their Falcon 9 rockets return after their brief foray into space is called "Of Course I Still Love You." Most recently, Elon Musk's personal reaction to the success of his Falcon Heavy test launch went viral on the internet, and it's no surprise. "Holy flying expletive, that thing took off," he exclaims in the mission control before gleefully running outside to view his creation with his own eyes. The joy is unmistakable. That very launch, of course, proved the success of his new Falcon Heavy rocket and landed the boosters of that rocket in the exact location and, incredibly, at the exact same time. Perhaps the best example of the sort of rock star persona that SpaceX brings was the payload of that Falcon Heavy rocket. Called the greatest car commercial of all time, Musk launched his own car, an unreleased prototype from the car company he also owns, on the tip of that rocket, sending it on a careening path out of Earth's orbit. Perhaps nothing encapsulates SpaceX's attitude better than the sight of an entire Earth reflecting off the hood of Elon Musk's Roadster. So where is SpaceX headed? Well, in short, to Mars. Musk's own self-proclaimed mission is to make life multiplanetary, to turn humanity into a fully realized spacefaring civilization. To accomplish this, SpaceX is developing what they are calling the BFR, which we will politely say stands for the Big Falcon Rocket. This monster vehicle, more than 340 feet tall, will boast the biggest payload capacity of any rocket in history, 150 tons. And yet, due to reusability, it is projected to also be the cheapest in history to launch and use. So much so, in fact, that it has been hypothesized by SpaceX to be used for transportation here on Earth. It would reduce travel time to anywhere on Earth to a maximum of a mere 30 minutes. Get on in London, get off in Shanghai, just like that. But obviously, the real destination is Mars, which Musk has said will be achieved with cargo in 2022 and humans in 2024. Once again, in case you missed that, human beings are planned to set foot on another planet within a few years. These images are taken from Musk's recent presentation at the International Astronautical Congress late last year. As indicated in the upper left, he imagines a colony on Mars growing to a size of millions in his own lifetime. Based on SpaceX's accomplishments so far, it seems for the first time that it is not unreasonable to believe that humanity's first permanent journey to a new world might be right around the corner. Many other missions are planned for the future as well. Of particular note is NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, Hubble's successor, if you will. Sporting a massive 6-meter gold-plated mirror aperture, Webb will view the universe in the coveted infrared spectrum, a sort of heat vision goggles way of looking at the light that will allow scientists to observe stars that are obscured by obstacles, in much the same way as a snake observes its prey, even though it is obscured by grass or weeds. Webb's sensitivity to heat is so high, in fact, that it could detect a bumblebee on the surface of the moon. Just one bumblebee. In order to maximize its data, Webb will be launched far, far beyond where any telescope has been launched before. It will reside in Earth's shadow more than 1 million miles away. Again, so that's the moon. We already talked about how far that is. That's where the Webb telescope is headed. That far away from Earth, Webb's parameters will have to be perfect. Unlike Hubble, it will not be possible for any maintenance to occur during its projected 5-year mission. It is said that Webb will offer an expansion to our perception of the universe in as great a degree or greater than what Hubble accomplished so many years ago. Other more exotic missions are planned as well. The top left image shows SpaceX's theorized extended use of the BFR to reach other destinations in the solar system, such as Europa, the moon of Jupiter. This moon has been measured to have vast quantities of liquid water beneath its surface, a prime location for life to develop. They hold that a vehicle as large and as versatile as theirs could be used to colonize nearly anywhere in the solar system. The moons of Saturn are also of great interest, such as Titan, which contains literal oceans of methane. Airborne missions, such as depicted in the top right, could allow us to investigate these strange distant worlds and their capacity for life. Finally, a company known as Deep Space Industries has begun actively working towards prospecting asteroids. A potentially trillion-dollar industry, they are not alone. They and several other companies imagine fleets of surveying, mining, and processing drone vehicles, unlocking the riches hidden in the many millions of rocks that orbit our sun. These sorts of missions would require large amounts of propellant, or rocket fuel, and other companies still imagine how they might provide that fuel with way stations scattered throughout the solar system. This creation of infrastructure would unlock access to space, much like the railroad or interstate highway system did in this very country. Where we might end up. It is at this point that things take a turn for the speculative. Equipped with the perspective provided by where we've been, where we're going, we can begin to imagine what this might mean about the slightly more distant future. I'd like to begin this section by showing a short film by Eric Wernquist titled Wanderers. It is particularly noteworthy that in nearly all of its images are compiled from previously existing real-world photography of the relevant objects by NASA probes. In other words, the CGI is in large part limited to what might inhabit these places in the future, but the places themselves are, in most cases, real. Enjoy.
For all its material advantages, the sedentary life has left us edgy, unfulfilled. Even after 400 generations in villages and cities, we haven't forgotten. The open road still softly calls, like a nearly forgotten song of childhood. We invest far-off places with a certain romance. The appeal, I suspect, has been meticulously crafted by natural selection as an essential element in our survival. Long summers, mild winters, rich harvests, plentiful game. None of them lasts forever. Your own life, or your band's, or even your species might be owed to a restless few, drawn by a craving they can hardly articulate or understand, to undiscovered lands and new worlds. Herman Melville in Moby Dick spoke for wanderers in all epochs and meridians. He said, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas.
I want to now take a look at a few of the stills from the film and explain them a bit. This one here is what it might look like for a human to arrive at and view Jupiter's great red spot. Once again, the source data for this image is real, in this case taken from the images that Voyager 1 took of Jupiter on its long journey out of the solar system. The Cassini mission to Saturn, discussed earlier, and its moons, provided the source image for this still. This is Enceladus, an icy moon of Saturn that has some very peculiar features. You can see here that there are geysers of water and ice that erupt from Enceladus' surface, creating massive plumes hundreds of miles in height. Most of that material falls back to that moon's surface as snow, but some of it is caught up and joined to Saturn's rings, which also featured in the film. How remarkable it would be to see such geysers in person. The idea of a space elevator has long been hypothesized as the most efficient method of spacelift. By constructing an incredibly long structure connecting the surface of a planet with an object in geostationary orbit, one could do most of the work of spacelift all in advance. After that, going to and from orbit would simply consist in following the line up and down. Earth's size makes it a very unlikely candidate for a space elevator, though, since the location of a geostationary orbit of Earth is more than 5 Earth radii away from our surface. Mars, however, with its smaller size and gigantic mountains multiple times the size of Everest, is a prime candidate. It is a little-known fact that the sun's behavior on Mars is opposite to that of Earth. That is to say, during the day there, rather than during the sunset, the sun and sky glow red. Whereas the sunset on Mars is when the sky and the sun look blue. This picture was actually taken by the Curiosity rover shown earlier, and the only CGI here is the addition of the people. Perhaps the most speculative of all, this image, of course, bears no similarity to any existing object or location. Yet. It is an imagination of a world formed in the hollowed-out center of an asteroid. The asteroid is set spinning, simulating the effect of gravity for those contained within. Sunlight and energy is provided from the central line, which could be powered perhaps by nuclear fusion, the same power source for naturally occurring stars. A result of several images from probes around Jupiter stitched together, this image represents what it might look like to walk on the surface of Jupiter's moon Europa. Another moon, Io, is seen in the distance, and the planet Jupiter itself fills the horizon. It would be an incredible spectacle indeed to witness a planet occluding that much of the horizon of the world. Here we are in the moon Titan. Now, stick with me on this one, all right? It is, I know it looks crazy. It is the only other body in the solar system known to have oceans of liquid on its surface, mentioned earlier, in this case, right, methane. It would be tempting here to discount these flying people as the imaginings of a science fiction author. However, measurements of this particular moon have actually shown a unique combination that would theoretically allow for self-propelled human flight. First, the gravity is a mere 14% that of Earth. And furthermore, the atmosphere is incredibly dense, providing something to push off of. You could quite literally fly around. And indeed, as mentioned earlier, flying robotic drones are already planned to go to Titan to map it and take data. This location is the Verona Rupes on Miranda, a small moon of Uranus. It contains what is thought to be the highest cliff in the solar system. Measured by a passing probe several years ago, it rises to an estimated minimum of 3 miles above the surface of that moon, perhaps more. The probe was just passing by on an orbit to another location. But combined with the gravity of Miranda, which is only about 2% that of Earth, a base jump from this cliff would last more than 12 minutes. And remarkably, after all that, you could land on your feet without the help of a parachute. This last shot, titled Ring Shine by the filmmaker, shows a particular feature of Saturn. There exists a spot where if you were suspended with, say, a dirigible, you could exist without the need of a pressurized spacesuit. It would be extremely cold, and the use of oxygen would be required, but at this particular elevation on Saturn, the pressure is the same as atmospheric pressure on Earth. And so we move on to the question of why. I remind you here that I will present some various thoughts and musings, some of my own and some of other scientists and writers, but that I encourage you to consider the question yourself. I'll mention before I start that I won't be using what might be considered the standard answers. That is to say, I won't tell you about how many spin-off technologies we could develop, for instance. Technological advancement as a byproduct of space science is often cited as a good reason to pursue space science. So like side effects may include awesome stuff. And while no doubt spin-off technologies such as freeze-drying, solar cells, digital signal processing, etc. are incredible and useful, a vastly more productive source of spin-off technologies has historically been open war with another hostile country, which I certainly do not hold as a good goal to pursue. So I will be looking at some other ideas of why space science is a worthwhile field to invest in. I want to start by reading an excerpt from a speech delivered by a scientist named Dr. Robert Zubrin. A longtime champion for the Humans to Mars program, Dr. Zubrin sums up very nicely the three main reasons he sees for going to Mars. He says, and I quote, "As I see it, there are three reasons why Mars should be the goal of our space program. And in short, it's because Mars is where the science is, it's where the challenge is, and it's where the future is. It's where the science is because Mars was once a warm and wet planet. It had liquid water on its surface for more than 1 billion years, which is about 5 times as long as it took for life to appear on Earth after there was liquid water here. So if the theory is correct, that life is a natural development from chemistry, or if you have liquid water, various elements in sufficient time, life should have appeared on Mars even if it subsequently went extinct. And if we can go to Mars and find fossils of past life, we will have proven that life is a general phenomenon in the universe. Or, alternatively, if we go to Mars and find plenty of evidence of past bodies of water and no evidence of fossils or the development of life, that could say that the development of life from chemistry is not a sort of natural process that occurs with high probability, but includes elements of free chance and we could be alone in the universe. Furthermore, if we can go to Mars and drill, because there's liquid water underground on Mars, and reach the groundwater, there could be life there now. And if we can get hold of that and look at it and examine its biological structure, its biochemistry, we could find out if life as it exists on Mars is the same as Earth life. Because all Earth life at the biochemical level is the same. We all use the same amino acids, the same methods of replicating and transmitting information, RNA, DNA, all that. Is that what life has to be? Or could life be very different from that? Are we what life is? Or are we just one example, drawn from a much vaster tapestry of possibilities? This is real science. These are fundamental questions that thinking men and women have wondered about for thousands of years, the role of life in the universe. This is very different from going to the moon and dating craters in order to produce enough data to get a credible paper to publish in the Journal of Geophysical Research and get tenure. This is hypothesis-driven critical science. This is the real thing. Second, the challenge. I think societies are like individuals. We grow when we challenge ourselves. We stagnate when we do not. The Humans to Mars program would be a tremendously bracing challenge for our society, tremendously productive, particularly among the youth. The Humans to Mars program would say to every kid in school today, learn your science, and you could be an explorer of new worlds. We get millions of scientists, engineers, inventors, technological entrepreneurs, doctors, medical researchers out of that. And the intellectual capital from that would enormously benefit us. It would dwarf the cost of the program. And then finally, it's the future. Mars is the closest planet that has on it all the resources necessary to support life, and therefore civilization. If we do what we can do in our time to establish that little Plymouth Rock settlement on Mars, then 500 years from now, there'll be new branches of human civilization on Mars, and I believe throughout nearby interstellar space. Look, I ask any American, what happened in 1492? And they'll tell me, well, Columbus sailed in 1492. And that is correct, he did. But that's not the only thing that happened in 1492. In 1492, England and France signed a peace treaty. In 1492, the Borgias took over the papacy. In 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici, the richest man in the world, died. A lot of things happened. If there had been newspapers in 1492, which there weren't, but if there had, those would have been the headlines, not some Italian weaver's sons taking some ships and sailing off to nowhere. Okay? But Columbus is what we remember, not the Borgias taking over the papacy. Well, 500 years from now, people are not going to remember which faction came out on top in Iraq, or Syria, or whatever, and who was in, who was out. But they will remember what we do to make their civilization possible. So this is the most important thing we could do, the most important thing we could do in our time. And if you have it in your power to do something great and important and wonderful, then you should. End quote. Very compelling, in my opinion. The next idea I want to discuss is the notion of ontological design. In short, it describes how the things that we design us in return. That we are in many ways designed by that which we have designed. This then causes us to design new things, which then design us back, and on and on. This self-amplifying feedback loop relationship with technology has arguably existed since the beginning of human history. As soon as we developed stone tools, our jaws shrank. As soon as we developed cooking and sophisticated food preparation, each meal became that much more nutritionally efficient and freed up the cognitive mental real estate that resulted in the development of art, government, and culture. We build our tools, and our tools build us back. Or put another way, our thoughts craft our spaces, and our spaces then craft our thoughts. Thomas MacLaren himself was an example of this, as his keen architectural sense was honed by his time spent in such beautiful places as London and Glasgow. Could he have become what he was without these spaces of mind in which he dwelled? However, despite this relationship, technology is often seen as being unnatural in what has been dubbed by the cognitive philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers as the skin bag bias. That somehow that which is contained within our skin tissue is natural, but that which is without is somehow unnatural. But seen another way, technology is as much a part of us as the mound is a part of a termite and the nest a part of the bird. It is an exterioration of our nervous system, our imagination turned inside out. And so as we pursue the technology of space science, what change might this cause within ourselves? The writer Marina Benjamin put it like this: what the space age was seeking all along was not so much an expansion of physical space as an expansion of mind. Finally, I want to talk about how space exploration could provide a unity of perception for humanity. In other words, how stepping out into the unknown could bring people together, yes, around a goal to achieve, it's a challenge to overcome, but also bring people together around a breathtaking experience of the universe unlike any experience before. Pictured here is the famous Hubble Deep Field image, where the space telescope was oriented at an ostensibly empty region of space and turned up to maximum zoom. The remarkable image that emerged is stunning. In this small fraction of space, we see galaxies upon galaxies, all containing billions of stars in their own right, pinwheel around in deep space and deep time. This image alone provides a stunning shift in perception of humanity's place in the universe. Ross Anderson, in his incredible essay on the James Webb Telescope titled Golden Eye, states the following. He says, "The space telescope has remade in a single generation the popular conception of the universe. It has accomplished this primarily through the aesthetic force of its discoveries, which distill the difficult abstractions of astrophysics into singular expressions of color and light, vindicating Keith's famous couplet, 'Beauty is truth, truth, beauty.' The telescope compels the mind to contemplate space and time on a scale just shy of the infinite." End quote. In the case of astronauts, the feeling or effect of beholding something so remarkable as, for instance, the Earth in its entirety has been classified as the psychological condition known as the overview effect. It has been described by psychologists as a cognitive reframing, that viewing everything on Earth as one single solitary thing provides a dramatic recontextualization of the world. It has been associated with greater feelings of empathy and compassion. the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald spoke the following words about the way the beauty of this very continent struck him. He said, "For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath. Compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder." Consider then perhaps the effect of the beauty that awaits us out there. Experiences such as this can engage and encourage people to push into what author Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible. He says the adjacent possible is a kind of shadow future, hovering on the edges of the present state of things, a map of all the ways that the present can reinvent itself. And how exciting that really is. To have an opportunity, by expanding the space of subjectivity in which humanity dwells, to reinvent the present. Another quote, often attributed to W.B. Yeats, puts it this way: "The universe is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharp." In summary, I'd like to read the following remarks from Dr. Carl Sagan. He says, "We were hunters and foragers. The frontier was everywhere. We were bounded only by the earth, the ocean, and the sky. The open road still softly calls. Our little terraqueous globe is the madhouse of those 100,000 millions of roads. We who cannot even put our own planetary home in order, riven with rivalries and hatred, are we to venture out into space? By the time we are ready to settle even the nearest other planetary systems, we will have changed. The simple passage of so many generations will have changed us. Necessity will have changed us. We're an adaptable species. It will not be we who reach Alpha Centauri and the other nearby stars. It will be a species very like us, but with more of our strengths and fewer of our weaknesses. More confident, far-seeing, capable, and prudent. For all our failings, despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders, undreamt of in our time, will we have brought in another generation or another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century and the next millennium? Our remote descendants, safely arrayed on many worlds through the solar system and beyond, will be unified by their common heritage, by their regard for their home planet, and by the knowledge that whatever other life may be, the only humans in all the universe come from Earth. They will gaze up and strain to find the blue dot in their skies. They will marvel at how vulnerable the repository of all our potential once was, how perilous our infancy, how humble our beginnings, how many rivers we had to cross before we found our way. See, it's fascinating to me to think of the journey that we are still on. I think it can be tempting sometimes, living in the present, living as we are in this age of technology, in this age of so much advancement, to imagine that we've made it, that we are somehow a pinnacle. But consider, if we are just another step on the journey, consider what steps must come next. The author, Marina Benjamin again, puts it like this: when we dream of space, we dream of transcendence. We dream of what we might become. And so what I submit to you is that, yes, like the title of this talk, we push forward to new worlds out there in the solar system. But as we do, what sort of new world will we journey to right here on Earth? Thank you. Now, we're going to have some time for some Q&A here in a moment. I remind you, of course, that my degree is in physics, but I'm not an astronaut. I haven't been there. I don't have a PhD in aerospace engineering yet. But of course, we can field some questions. But before I do get to that, I did want to take this opportunity to announce some very exciting news. While space science has long been a fascination and hobby of mine, it will hopefully soon become my career. I have been selected by the United States Air Force for a commission as a space operations officer. Unfortunately, delays in training will postpone my departure until much later next year, but I look forward to what sort of exciting future awaits me in a space science-oriented career. So I looked into it, and we only have the one mic, so if you have questions, I guess you'll just kind of have to project a bit, but if people have any thoughts or questions, you're welcome to voice them now. Yeah?
So one of our seniors did an assembly on space trash, and if we're planning on sending a bunch of stuff into space and colliding with it, what are the plans with that?
Yeah, what a great question. So she's speaking about the idea of debris, right? We've launched so many disposable missions, right? At this point, there's a significant amount of sort of first stages of rockets just sort of floating around in orbit. Sometimes you imagine this is like this dense cloud of trash above Earth. Keep in mind, space is really big. So there's a lot of room up there for that trash. But nevertheless, it does pose a concern. One of the interesting answers to it I've seen is that the BFR, this large rocket that SpaceX is developing, has an extremely large sort of capacity for cargo. But suppose instead you launch it without cargo, and then you can open it up and sort of scoop it up like this massive bulldozer and then bring it back down because, of course, the rocket is reusable. It can land. So there are actually some really interesting ideas to address it because, as Liz mentions here, it is a serious concern moving forward into the future.
What would some of the challenges be of sending people across these long distance space travels? What would some of the possible solutions that be, like pressurized cabins and cryosleep possibly?
Yeah, so he mentions it mentions once again that space is really big, and if we're sending people across vast distances of nothingness, what sort of dangers exist and what ways might you address those dangers? Of course, I mentioned that I didn't include as much of the sort of scary parts in the talk in favor of optimism, but some of the dangers include high levels of radiation. Earth's magnetic field defends us, or it protects us from the sun's more harmful rays by directing them towards the poles, hence the aurora borealis. But in space, no such shield exists, so you might say, oh, well, just have some lead lining in the walls. Well, lead's really heavy. It's really hard to launch on a rocket, so they are thinking, for instance, in the case of SpaceX, to have sort of a blast shelter where space has weather, right? You can forecast it, and if there was some stormy weather forecasted, then all of the people would go out of their cabins and go into this shelter until it was safe. And the other thing that Connor mentioned here was the idea of putting people into some. Sorry. Putting people into some sort of induced stasis, or what Connor said, cryosleep. This is really used in science fiction a lot because you think, man, you're really bored. You sit in a spaceship for like 5 years to get somewhere. So just go to sleep. This is, of course, more in the field of biology than space. And what I will say is that it has been investigated. Right, there are people out there that are trying to do it on things like rats and mice and whatever. And shockingly, there exists this phenomenon already in nature. Right, there are certain types of amphibians that essentially freeze solid in the winter and then thaw and are just fine. So it's not that it's completely fictional, but certainly there's been no active plans to make it happen yet. But it is something I think that certainly deserves a look. Yeah.
This Elon Musk putting his own Tesla car in space. That fascinates me. I could just see a couple of space travelers from some galaxy far, far away comes upon this thing, and it's got this astronaut suit stuffed in there. And one guy turns to the other and says, "Hey, Zarkon, look, the people will hurry for dummies."
Yeah. It's sort of funny to me. You imagine all of these incredible things, the Rosetta Disk and the Golden Record and all these really, sort of carefully crafted things. And, it would be funny if the thing that was actually found was a sports car. Yeah.
How long does it take to get to Mars?
That's a great question. And it actually ties into when the planned mission dates are. So Mars and Earth are orbiting the sun at different rates. And so it happens that we are close together only about every 2 years. When we're close together, it has been hypothesized to take as little as 3 months. When we're far apart, it's more like 9 months. And so maybe a ballpark estimate is something in between that. But the reason why they're launching in 2022 with the cargo and 2024 with the people is that if you didn't launch during those windows, it would almost take you just as long to get there, right? Like you might as well wait on Earth and launch later when it takes a short time than sit on a spaceship for almost a year. But Yeah, so it's on the order of months.
Wait, so kind of going off that question, I'm pretty sure you told me it takes like 20 minutes, or it would take 20 minutes to send an email or a text message to North. So how hard would it be to like stay in contact with the people traveling there to make sure they're safe or make sure that they're like?
Yes, you should. All right. So. So she's making a reference to the lag time in communication, right? So one of the things in physics, right, that all my students are quite familiar with is that the maximum speed limit, right, is the speed of light. It's about, as I mentioned, 186,000 miles per second. We don't tend to use those units in physics class, of course. We tend to say 300 million meters per second. But the danger then is, well, how do you stay in touch, right? If there's, say, something goes wrong and they need to call up NASA and say, hey, this thing just happened, what do we do? As they're, I don't know, hurtling to some sort of dangerous situation, you got to wait 20 minutes to hear back. So,
Could you just download people there?
now the speculative, this I like. So the lag time means is that incredible planning is involved. It's kind of like the idea with the James Webb Telescope being so far from Earth. You got to plan for every single thing, because if anything goes wrong, there's not much can be done about it. So when you think about human beings going to a place where the fastest that information is physically allowed to travel is 20 minutes, that there's an incredible amount of precision that would need to be involved. So, or I guess training for those human beings. But definitely something worth highlighting. Or as even further, as you mentioned, what about once you've got a colony there? You know, how do they keep in touch with Earth? It's almost like we'd be thrown back to sort of like a previous, communication style, right? I mean, to take it for granted now, you can just pick up your phone and send a cat picture to India, but when you're on Mars and you gotta wait 20 minutes, I mean, it's kind of like, how are you doing might not be the best way to start that conversation. So, yeah, other questions? Yeah.
In traveling outside the solar system, there are just vast stretches of nothingness, essentially. So are there any ideas for how to overcome the limitations of having to carry fuel?
Yeah, I appreciate him asking this. I almost wonder if you're just kind of teeing this one up as a softball for me. But you'll note that I didn't actually include in my presentation any ideas of planned interstellar travel. And this is because, as he rightly notes, there are vast would be a dramatic understatement. There are vast tracts of space. So if we're sort of amazed by, wow, it takes 5.5 hours for light to get to Pluto, it takes 4 years for light to get to Alpha Centauri. So how could we possibly get there using chemical fuel-based rockets? So currently, most of the answer from the scientific community is, I don't know. But there are some out there who hypothesize the use of what you might call a solar sail, using a feature of physics called radiation propulsion. And the idea is when light hits something, it transfers a very small amount of momentum, right? So you're not going to like knock somebody over by turning on a flashlight, but if you had a large enough reflective object, and when I say large enough, I mean for like a human-sized spacecraft, you would need like multiple square kilometers of sail. Then you could potentially accelerate a spacecraft up to a reasonable percentage of the speed of light, right? Something like 10 or 20%. And that would make the Alpha Centauri sort of within reach. There are a couple of downsides though. For instance, where are the brakes? Once you've gotten going, what are you supposed to do? Like turn the sail around and like catch it? I don't know. And so this is a major challenge. One company in particular has actually tried to address the sort of logistical limitations of interstellar travel by basically saying, why don't we use nanoparticles? Why don't we use tiny machines the size of a dust mote or smaller? And when you think of accelerating those, well, they're tiny. So you could, say, shoot a real powerful laser at a cloud of these nanites, and they would start speeding up toward Alpha Centauri, and the calculations actually have them getting there in something like 80 years, which you're like, wow, that's a long time. But like, it's 4 light years. I mean, that's pretty good. And there are some downsides to that one too. So the first one is that it's currently illegal to build a laser that powerful, because it would be like dangerous in warfare. And then the other limitation is that once you've sped your little dust particle spaceships up fast enough to reach Alpha Centauri, they would only be within the limits of that star system for 8 minutes, which means that you wait 80 years and you're like, here it comes. All right, you get 8 minutes of data. I mean, that's a steep price, you know. So anyway, those are some of the ideas that exist out there, but clearly interstellar travel is sort of its own sort of kettle of fish. Yeah.
So this is kind of connected to Connor's question. As far as protection from the sun's radiation goes, so one of the cool things about E&M is that you can create a magnetic field by like rotating an area or changing an electric field. So is there a way that we could like send something to Mars or places that other elongated inhabitants and like create our own magnetic field as our own protection for that?
Yeah, my students are making me proud here tonight. So the idea that was put forth here was, so if indeed the Earth's magnetic field is what defends us from much of the harmful radiation, could we not therefore create a magnetic field on a spaceship by, say, running a current around the ship or something similar? It's actually interesting. This feature, this type of thing, is sometimes referred to as a bucking coil, a magnetic bucking coil. And the answer to that is yes. I think that active shielding is going to wind up being the answer. And so it's cool that you mentioned it, you know, whether you read about it or came up with it. I'm going to choose to think that you came up with it, you know. We're going to call it the Natalie Link bucking coil. So, anyway, in the future, I think active shielding from radiation using magnetic field will in fact be used. I'm told this is the last question, but these were great. Thank you so much.